This lecture has been made available to you courtesy of the American Numismatic Society.
Hello, everyone. I'm very pleased to introduce today's speaker. Stefano Locatelli has a doctorate in economic and social history from the University of Manchester. He currently holds a Marie Skłodowska-Curie Global Postdoctoral Fellowship at the University of Milan and Fordham University in New York City, where he is currently researching references to coinage and money for educational purposes in late medieval merchant manuals and arithmetic textbooks. He recently published a book on the circulation and use of the Florentine florin during its first few decades, which is what he will be talking about today. Stefano, over to you.
Thank you very much, David, and good afternoon, or, well, good evening, depending on where you are. It's such a real pleasure for, to be here and in such a distinguished venue and present my last book, and the first one as a single author. So I just want to, start by, expressing my gratitude, of course, to the American Numismatic Society for the kind invitation and their warm hospitality. I will now share my PowerPoint, and then we can start. Okay. Okay. Can anyone see it?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. So over the next 40 to 50 minutes, I will take you through the main ideas of my book, the questions that guided my research, and what is new about it. I then will turn to the story of the gold florin from its prehistory in the late 12th century to its remarkable spread across Europe and the Mediterranean by the early 14th. I will do so by focusing on the role of three key actors in this story, which are the mercantile elite of Florence, the Angevin crown, and the papacy. Of course, I hope this presentation does full justice to a work that took me a great deal of time and energy to bring to completion. So if not, I encourage you all to look at the book, which is available online and freely. You can download it for free, basically, on the Manchester University Press website. So the image on the cover of the book shows the oldest surviving view of medieval Florence. At its center stands the baptistry of St. John, to the right, the original facade of the Duomo. It comes from the Madonna della Misericordia, or the Madonna of Mercy, fresco painted around 1340 in the workshop of Bernardo Daddi. I chose this image not only for its beauty, but because it visually frames the story I'm about to tell. By the time this fresco was created, the Fiorino d'Oro, or gold florin, first struck in Florence in 1252, had already become the most prestigious, widely imitated, and internationally recognized coin in medieval Europe. Within a generation, the florin's reach was extraordinary, inspiring the creation of new gold coins that imitated both its iconography and fineness, including its chief rival, the Venetian gold ducat of 1285. So a question naturally arises: how could a city like Florence, neither a kingdom nor an empire, and without imperial minting rights, produce a gold coin of just 3.53 grams and 20 millimeters, about the size of the late US penny, that went on to dominate European and Mediterranean commerce for 3 centuries, earning the reputation of the dollar of the Middle Ages? Answering this question and tracing the origins and the early life of the florin, however, proved far from straightforward. Several major obstacles complicated this task. The first challenge was the scarcity of surviving archaeological material. Ideally, one would begin with physical evidence, such as single finds and coin hoards, to reconstruct where and how florins circulated. Single finds, which can reveal circulation patterns or help estimate the lifespan of a currency, are, however, typically dominated by low-value coins, while gold specimens, like the Florin, are exceptionally rare. Those are more likely to appear in hordes, basically, but only 6 containing gold florins and dating from the 13th century have been discovered or published so far. Only 2 of these, however, can possibly relate to the coin's earliest phase, the hoard from the Loggia dei Banchi in Pisa, likely buried around 1269, and the 1270 Trapani shipwreck treasure. Their composition and location suggest that the Florin's first life unfolded not within Florence and its immediate countryside, but along broader Mediterranean networks. Museum specimens are, of course, invaluable for studying style and iconography, as shown by Massimo De Benetti's recent work, but they rarely come with a reliable provenience. So together, all these elements explain why hoards and archaeological evidence do not feature prominently in my book. Unfortunately, the local written record is not much kinder. First, there is a total lack of contemporary minting records. Florence Libro della Zecca, or its official mint register, begins only in 1303, 50 years too late. Not even statutes or monetary ordinances survive from the period 1250s, 1260s. So the earliest accounts of the Florin's creation appear instead in 2 much later chronicles, those of Paolino Pieri and Giovanni Villani, written in the 1st and 3rd decades of the 14th century, respectively. However, both offer contrasting narratives shaped by personal perspective and ideology rather than first-hand accuracy. Neither Pieri nor Villani did witness the minting of the coin. A closer reading of the two highlights their differences. Pieri's note is brief. He states that the coin was made under the podestà Filippo degli Ugoni, adding that no one wanted it. Villani's account, by contrast, is far more elaborate. He situates the event during a period of Florentine prosperity and credits the merchants, his own social class, with proposing the coin and supplying the gold. Villani's story has long dominated historiography, shaping the enduring view of the florin as a mercantile invention born from the needs of international trade. It is precisely this interpretation that my book seeks to challenge. Another issue is the scarcity of early references to the florin in Florentine documents. This graph shows the annual occurrence of the term gold florin in the Diplomatico collection of the State Archive of Florence between 1252 and 1294, which comprises documents from public offices, municipalities, institutions, religious orders, and private individuals across Tuscany, so not just Florence. The light bar represents the total number of surviving documents each year. The dark bars indicate those mentioning florins both as actual coin, and as money of account, a difference I will explain in a bit. Even with about 10,600 documents for the period, references before 1280 are extremely rare. Mentioned first emerge in the mid-1260s, disappear for some time, and reappear more frequently only after the late 1270s. Yet 5 of the earliest supposed references, dated 1264, 66, 72, 74, and 75, proved to be 18th century forgeries. So once excluded, only 18 genuine documents remain, far too few to suggest that the florin played a major role in local circulation in its early decades. Final obstacle was and is what I call the burdensome legacy of the commercial revolution narrative. For generations, historians have interpreted the florin as the rational outcome of Europe's economic revival in the 13th century, a natural response to the needs of merchants engaged in long-distance trade, after centuries of silver monometallism. Indeed, after Charlemagne's reform in the late 8th century, Western Europe minted only silver coins. The denarius, and later from the 12th century onwards, the late 12th century, the grosso. Gold, meanwhile, continued to be struck in the Muslim and Byzantine worlds. By the mid-15th century, however, these foreign gold currencies were in decline. Debasement and political disruption left Europe without a reliable high-value medium. Just as commerce expanded, the most stable form of money disappeared. It was in this context that Genoa, Florence, and Lucca began to experiment with new gold coins, the Genovino d'oro, the Fiorino d'oro, and the Grosso d'oro, respectively. The conventional view sees them as the culmination of a centuries-long return to gold. Yet, while this explanation remains valid, in many respects, scholars have rarely attempted to move beyond it. As Lucia Travaini noted in 1207, the most famous coin of the Middle Ages has also been one of the most neglected by numismatists, and not only by them, we can add. Addressing that gap became one of the main goals of my research. But how did I tackle all these issues? First, I combined numismatic, archaeological, and documentary evidence together, especially unpublished records referring explicitly to the Florin. Given the scarcity of mint data and Florentine sources, which I showed, I expanded my investigation beyond Florence, consulting 6 more major archives, those of Lucca, Pisa, Venice, Genoa, Naples, and the Vatican. It is worth remembering here maybe that medieval documents often blur the line between actual coins and monies of account, or standard units, which were not used in payments, but were used in accounting and bookkeeping. To trace genuine exchange, I focus on cases where physical coins were clearly implied. In other words, when multiple currencies were listed together, when sums were expressed both in coin and account units, or when the record mentioned a payment made by hand. In this way, my reconstruction rests on the real transactions, moments when Florentine florins did change hands within the complex monetary landscape of the Middle Ages. Looking beyond commercial records also proved particularly fruitful. By extending the search to political, ecclesiastical, and diplomatic contexts, I was able to identify the earliest secure references to the florin's use. So the first come from Parma, dated the 23rd of March, 1258, where Guglielmo Beroardi, acting for the Florentine government, compensated Matteo and Guido dei Denti with 1,200 libre, pounds, of Florini Parvi, money of account in this case, but 800 of these were actually paid in gold florins, and they specify each worth 1 libra, 1 pound. A second reference comes from Lucca and is dated the 21st of April, 1258, records the money changer Gerardino Tacchi lending 10 pounds, 10 libre, paid in, they say, 10 gold coins of Lucca and Florence to 2 senior clergymen. The third example appears in 2 folios, once belonging to a Florentine treasury ledger. They record a payment of 50 gold florins delivered in a large red silk pouch to Manenteo Guccioni d'Aiesi, that's exactly what they say, ambassador of King Manfred of Sicily, on the 27th of July, 1259. The payment was likely intended to be both a diplomatic gift and a gesture of political support in Manfred's conflict against Pisa. Together, these documents already suggest a rather different story from what Villani told us, or from Villani's account. While his chronicle places the florin firmly in the mercantile sphere, these records reveal its early use in ecclesiastical, political, and diplomatic exchanges. And from the outset, the florin also operated as a medium for transferring wealth and influence across network of power. Another shift in my research was geographical. The traditional narrative connects the florin with Florence commercial expansion northward, towards the beyond the Alps and towards the Champagne fairs, citing early exchange rates from 1263-64. My book instead turns attention southward, here we are, toward the Mediterranean basin and specifically the Angevin kingdom of Sicily. In the second half of the 15th century, this region became a key sphere of Florentine activity. Florentines were among the Tuscan merchant bankers that financed Charles of Anjou's conquest of these territories. And in return, they gained influence, contracts, access to the market. Yet this southern dimension had rarely been explored in relation to the florin. Therefore, by embedding the coin with the Mediterranean network, linking the Angevin monarchy, papal finance, and military logistics, I show that the florin's early diffusion owed as much to this southern circuit of power as to the northern trade routes often emphasized by earlier scholarship. Finally, and here we are, I sought to move beyond the commercial revolution framework, which limit our understanding of the florin in two main ways. So first, it treats the coin's creation as the inevitable endpoint of long-term economic processes, without considering what happened after, how the florin spread, who used it, and why it succeeded where other gold coins failed. Second, it reduces the story to purely economic terms, detaching the coin from the political, cultural, and social forces that shaped its early life. Previous studies also tended to assume a single theory of money. The metalist view sees coins' value as residing in its metal content, basically. The chartalist one instead ties value to the state, to the issuing authority. Rather than choosing between the two, or just choosing one, my book basically combines these two. The florin was undeniably a coin of pure gold, or if you want, a metalist dream, but its endurance stemmed equally from the credibility of the Florentine commune and the reputation of its merchants. To this, I added insight from the sociology of money, which reminds us that value is also social, created through trust, habit, and shared practices among people. The same was true in the Middle Ages. From mining and refining to design and iconography, the florin's meaning was shaped by human agency. In this interplay of metal, power, and people, is this interplay of metal, power, and people, yeah, that the book also seeks to illuminate. So, by combining all these approaches, I reconstructed the florin's early history from a fresh perspective, and what emerges is not simply the story of a coin born from commercial needs, but of a powerful instrument that helped shape the political and social landscape of the 15th century Italian peninsula and Europe. Through a broad analysis of the interaction between individuals and institutions, I argue that the florin's success depended on its integration into wider networks of power, connecting three main actors: the Florentine mercantile elite, the Angevin crown, and the papacy. The florin became a tool for taxation, diplomacy, and warfare, an active agent capable of influencing kingship and advancing civic ambition. In the remaining time, I will guide you through the chapters of my book, showing how each of these actors helped secure the florin's extraordinary success. Together, they reveal what this coin truly represented in its own time. So, chapter 1 explores the prehistory of the Florentine florin, the century or so that preceded its minting in 1252. Moving from a macro to a micro perspective, that is, from the broader economic and monetary conditions of Europe and the Mediterranean to Florence local context, it examines the factors that made possible both the return to gold in Western Europe and the appearance of the Florentine gold coin in Italy. But let's see them together. The first concerned the decline in the intrinsic value of existing gold coinage. This map shows the main centers minting gold in the first half of the 15th century and their principal denominations. Byzantine and Muslim coins circulated widely in Western Europe. Sources from Italian archives indicate that Sicilian taris, Muslim dinars, and Saracen bezants were especially common among Genoese and peasants, while Venetians dealt mostly in Perperi and bezant. By the mid-15th century, however, many of these currencies had deteriorated in quality due to debasement or had ceased to be struck altogether. The decline was also linked to political instability of the territories where these coins were produced. Think about the Christian Reconquista in Iberia, or the fall of the Almohad Empire in North Africa, or the fall of Constantinople in 1204 during the Fourth Crusade. Another key factor was the changing distribution of gold and silver across Eurasia. Gold was abundant in Africa, found in the historical region of Western Sudan, a vast plain south of the Sahara, stretching from the Atlantic to Lake Chad, while silver dominated in Europe. So economic historians have traditionally explained the movement of gold towards Europe as the result of shifting trade balances. In the 12th and 13th centuries, the balance favored Europe. African export, consisting mainly of bulk goods and raw materials, could not match the value of European manufactured imports, such as fine clothes and luxury goods. To settle these imbalances, African merchants increasingly use gold to make up the difference. As a result, gold flowed northward, while silver moved south. In what has been inadequately, and this is my comment, described as a direct exchange of one metal for the other. These exchanges would eventually create the reserves that made Europe's return to gold coinage possible. Some other scholars have also tied the timing of the new gold issues to the fluctuation in the so-called gold-silver ratios, or the amount of silver needed to buy a unit of gold. In 1252, they argue, the ratio reached its lowest point in the Middle Ages, apparently making gold production comparatively cheaper and encouraging cities like Genoa, Florence, and Lucca to mint gold instead of silver, thus easing the strain on silver supplies. While useful, such explanation should not be accepted at face value. Both the idea of a balance of payments and the precise calculation of metal ratios are modern concepts, resting on national economies and statistical data that were unknown to the Middle Ages. As Henry Miskimin rightly observed, the growing role of gold in Western Europe could result less from monetary arbitrage than from the expansion of trade itself. Also, gold could enter Europe through many other and non-commercial channels, notably booty and tributes. So taken together, these developments produce a growing concentration of gold in Europe that made gold coinage both feasible and profitable. So my main point in this section is that from a monetary standpoint, I argue that 1252 is not to be seen as a revolutionary event, but rather as an effective response to long-term pressures. After all, foreign gold coins, as I showed you, were still circulating in Europe, and documents show that several Western European cities with strong economies, and stronger than Florence at that time, had already tinkered with gold or even issued imitation of existing coins up to a century earlier. Examples, and these are all discussed in the book, include Genoa in 1149, Venice in 19, Marseille in 1226, Lucca in 1237, Montpellier in 1244. One could also add Frederick II Augustalis, gold Augustalis, minted in 1231 in the Kingdom of Sicily under Hohenstaufen rule. Yet, here we are. Above all, Lucca, Genoa, and Florence were the one that ultimately succeeded in minting their own gold coins. Now, although very purely documented, the first one was probably Lucca's Grosso d'Oro, a list of coins preserved in a late 13th century mercantile notebook suggests that its issue began around 1250-51, slightly before the Genoese and Florentine pieces. In Genoa, two denominations appeared in 1252, the Quartarola d'Oro, a quarter unit, and the Genovino d'Oro. The Annales Ianuenses, Genoa's official chronicles, mention that the striking of the striking of a gold nummus. This is a term that long puzzled scholars. Recent research by Monica Baldassari, however, which combines lexical analysis with X-ray studies of the coins, convincingly identifies the Quartarola as Genoa's earliest gold issue, struck simultaneously with the Genovino. Neither the Lucchese nor the Genoese coin, however, reached the 24-carat purity of the Florentine florin. Only in the late 1260s, early 70s, did both cities strike full purity specimen, as contemporary sources confirm. This discrepancy in fineness supports the view that the Lucchese and the Genoese issue predated the Florentine one. The most likely sequence is that Genoa and Lucca began minting gold independently, unaware of Florence's project. Yet, after the Florins' rapid success, both raised their fineness to remain competitive on the market. Adopting Florentine standards soon became common practice. Actually, as early as 1259, so only 7 years after the first minting of the florin, the city of Perugia ordered that its new gold coin should match the Florentine florin in weight and fineness, while its silver and bullion were to imitate Sienese models. So the coinage of Siena, basically. This project, however, never really realized, but it's quite telling about the success that the florin already had or was achieving by that time, only 7 years later its first minting. Genoa and Lucca, however, soon faced political and financial crises that limited the impact of their gold coinage. Florence alone managed to turn its experiment into a stable and international currency. To understand why, the focus shifted to Florence itself in the decades before 1252. Now, between 1200 and 1300, the city's population exploded from about 15,000 to over 100,000 inhabitants, one of the fastest growth rates in medieval Europe. Migration from the countryside supplied labor for a booming manufacturing sector. However, two forces pushed Florentines beyond their walls: the need to feed an expanding population like the one I've just mentioned, and the demands of the flourishing cloth industry. Alongside banking, these activities generated the wealth, expertise, and networks that laid the economic foundations for the florin's creation and diffusion. Politics proved equally crucial. The death of Emperor Frederick II in 1250 plunged Italy into turmoil. His successor, Conrad IV, lacked authority, and imperial rule in Tuscany quickly collapsed. In the resulting vacuum, Florence began to assert its regional dominance, while within the city, a new class of merchants, bankers, notaries, and judges rose to prominence as men, as primo populo, basically men enriched through commerce. It was in this political climate that the Florins was born. Minting gold had long been the prerogative of emperors and kings. By issuing its own gold coin, the Florentine commune, now governed by, I told you, the mercantile elite, made a bold declaration of sovereignty. The florin was not only a financial innovation, but also a political act, a symbol of civic autonomy and self-confidence. And its iconography reinforced this message. Unlike the coin of Genoa and Lucca, which still have references to the imperial authorities, the Florentine florin displayed the lily on one side and Saint John the Baptist on the other. Two purely civic emblems with no imperial titles and no ruler's portrait on its side. Therefore, the florin stood both as a monetary instrument and as a political manifesto, the tangible expression of a city that had begun to define itself on its own terms. Chapter 2 to 4 are each devoted to one of the major actors introduced earlier. Chapter 2 reconsidered the role of Florentine merchant bankers, showing that their involvement in the creation of the florin went far beyond the traditional account given by Villani. Through a close qualitative study of the fragmentary documentation concerning their activities across Europe and the Mediterranean up to the mid-13th century, the 1250s, I demonstrate that the Florentine merchants were not merely advocates calling for the new coin, but its makers in every sense. Their participation took multiple forms and occurred at different stages in the coin's early life. As I've summarized here, Florentine merchants were the ones who basically secured the gold supply, a point I will return to in a moment, possessed what I call the know-how or practical knowledge to manage the diverse monetary and measurement systems in use at the time, dealing with the myriad of coins in circulation, conducting international transactions, and keeping complex financial accounts. Their financial literacy is attested also by the earliest surviving account book, which is Florentine and dates to 1211. So many years before the first minting of the florin. They also had the know-how to run the Florentine mint, because there's documentary evidence showing that Florentine merchant bankers or merchants were involved in mining and minting activities at Montieri in the Tuscan Colline Metallifere or metal-bearing hills as early as 1214, again, many years before. Many years before the opening, actually, of the Florentine mint in the early 1230s, and as I said, many years before the introduction of the florin. They also had again, the know-how to oversee urban monetary production. The government regularly appointed mint master from 2 of the 7 major guilds or arti maggiori, specifically the Arte di Calimala, the guild of the cloth merchants, and the Arte del Cambio, the guild of bankers and money changers. So again, we see this connection between, the merchants, the bankers, the money changers, and the florin, or the world around the florin. And then they also had the capacity, that's another term I use in the book, to administer the city's monetary policy, because, as I've just illustrated, I mean, if the merchants managed the mint that produced the gold florin, and the mint was under the direct authority of the primo popolo, the government, composed largely of newly empowered members of the mercantile class, then the mint represented not just a physical site, but also a symbol, an instrument of economic and political power in the hands of Florentine merchant elite. These people also had the power to decide on the coin's iconography. This is more an argument that I make in this chapter, but I think there are elements, at least, suggesting that both Saint John the Baptist and the Lily were not just the civic emblems of the city, but they were actual expressions of the collective identity and ideology of the new mercantile class in power, especially of the Arte di Calimala, or, as I said, the Guild of the Clothes Merchant, running the mint, by the way, from which one of the two mint masters exactly was drawn. And finally, these merchants also provided the commercial and financial networks that enabled the florin's rapid diffusion across Europe and the Mediterranean. So the multifaceted activities of Florentine merchants transformed the florin from a local experiment into an international currency. Before moving on with chapters 3 and 4, I would like to take a moment to examine, however, where and how Florence obtained gold. Now, Tuscany, let's see. Okay. Tuscany had been an important mining region since the Etruscan period, and gold was among the minerals found in the above-mentioned Colline Metallifere region. But its volume was too limited to sustain profitable extraction. Moreover, in the 15th century, Florence, as a commune, did not control the area which was under direct control of the Bishop of Volterra. So the lack of mint register also for those decades makes it impossible to know what policies the commune employed to attract merchants and their reserves of precious metal to the Florentine mint. Archaeological and documentary evidence from Florence is also minimal. Only an 11th century hoard of 5 Fatimid dinars has been found in the city, and I was able to locate only one reference to 4 gold bezant in the Diplomatico collection dating to the late 12th century. These rare finds tell us a little about gold circulation before the 1250s. I mean, in Florence and in the countryside. However, gold was clearly present elsewhere in central and northern Italy. It appears in notarial register of Pisa, Lucca, and Siena, the other major Tuscan cities of the time. And so if Villani, or if, as Villani claimed, Florentine merchants provided gold for the local mint, they must have obtained it through other channels. The gold used for the florin production came primarily from long-distance trade, stretching from the Champagne fairs in northern France, a key market for precious metals, to the ports of the Middle East and North Africa, where Sudanese gold from south of the Sahara was traded. Florentine merchants increasingly operated along these axes. In the Mediterranean, they often used the Pisan flag of convenience, allowing them to benefit from Pisan commercial privileges and avoid custom duties. Many even resided in Pisan fondacos or trading houses in major port cities, giving them direct access to the gold market. What you see here, however, on the slide is a unique notarial document from Lucca, which illustrates this connection between Florence and the Mediterranean gold trade. Dated the 18th of September, 1243, it records that Florentine merchants, Brocardo, actually, son of Ricovero, acknowledged a debt of 465 pounds, libre, in denari of Lucca or Pisa, money of account, to Maffeo d'Afflitto of Scala, near Amalfi, near Naples, for, here we are, 100 ounces of gold of Napolitan weight, to be paid within a week in Pisa. This is the only attestation of a Florentine gold purchase I've been able to locate, and it dates to less than a decade before the minting of the florin. Crucially, it highlights Pisa's central role in Florentine business across the Mediterranean, despite the ongoing political rivalry between the two, as well as the importance of the Kingdom of Sicily as a key source of gold during the period. The yellow metal basically would travel by sea from Naples or Sicily to Pisa before continuing to Lucca, Florence, or other destinations by land or via the Arno River. Genoa too played a part in Florence gold supply. On the 13th of September 1251, Genoa and Florence signed a 5-year trade agreement granting Florentine merchants free movement and protection across Genoese territories. Yet around the same time, and I think in the same agreement, Genoa also passed protectionist laws forbidding Florentines from exporting raw gold or silver. This measure suggests that Genoa sought to preserve its own gold reserves, likely in preparation for the imminent striking of the Genovino. So far from implying any form of monetary agreement for a joint gold coinage, as recently proposed in MEC Volume 12, this episode instead reveals the intense competition between the two cities for access to gold, to precious metal. So although these written sources do not allow us to calculate the exact volumes of gold collected, they make one point clear. Florentine merchants were central to securing and managing, the city's gold supply. Their vast trading and financial networks provided the essential infrastructure that made both the production and the international success of the florin possible. With chapter 3 and 4, we basically move beyond the sphere of commerce into the realms of politics, public finance, and warfare. Together, these chapters explore how basically two major political powers, the Angevin monarchy under Charles of Anjou, King of Sicily in chapter 3, and the papacy of Pope Gregory X in chapter 4, contributed again to the diffusion of the florin. Chapter 3 reconstructs how the florin became embedded in the fiscal system of the Angevin monarchy, functioning as a domestic gold currency within the Kingdom of Sicily, despite the coexistence of local gold coinage, which you can see here. And some of them also add submultiples. So this development, or better, this role of the florin in the Kingdom of Sicily is traced through the registers of the Angevin Chancery, which preserved several apodixe, that's how they call them, or receipts issued by royal officials for payment into the royal treasury, each specifying the exact coins used. Although fragmentary, the earliest records mentioning florin date from 1269, but at that stage, the Florentine coin had not yet displaced local gold specimen as the kingdom's reference currency. A very different situation emerged in 1266-67 when we possessed for the first time a continuous series of apodixe, recording thousands, as you can see, of gold florins flowing into the royal coffers in the space of just 6 months. Several receipts explicitly state that the sum came from the subventio generalis, a direct tax collected annually on the movable goods and revenues of all laymen. Whether taxpayers paid in florins or whether the proceeds were converted before remittance, these documents confirm that actual deposits were made in Florentine gold. The florin had thus entered the kingdom's fiscal bloodstream, accepted for taxation and stored in the Camera Regia beside the king's own coins. Florins were also used for military wages, court expenses, and royal projects. Far from functioning as a foreign coin, the florin had become a standard instrument for high-value payments across the kingdom. The florin's ascendancy in royal finance is vividly illustrated by an episode dated the 3rd of April, 1278, when basically faced with the enormous cost of maintaining his mercenary forces, Charles of Anjou, the king, ordered his French treasurer, Guillaume Bouchel, to withdraw, as you can see, 6,500 or 6,500 ounces of florins from the royal treasury in Naples and carry them to Capua to cover 3 months of soldiers' wages. Yet only 2,800 or 2,800 ounces were available. In response, Charles instructed his officials to exchange all domestic gold for Florentine florins in Naples at the best possible rate, warning them not to reveal that the crown was the buyer, lest money changers raise their prices. Only if no florins could be obtained were they to fall back to local gold reali. This remarkable order demonstrates the persistent demand for Florentine gold, driven primarily by mercenaries who wanted basically to be paid in florins. For them, the coin's 24-karat fineness and universal acceptability made it the most desirable medium of payment, valid and exchangeable throughout the Mediterranean and Europe. For the monarchy, paying in florins guaranteed the loyalty of its army and projected an image of fiscal credibility. Charles' reliance on a foreign coin, even to the point of exchanging his own royal gold for it, reveals both the prestige of the florin and the dependence of the crown upon it. The episode also highlights the profound interplay between politics and currency. The florin was actively sought by the monarchy as it provided the means to sustain war, administration, and political authority. Through this process, the florin gained a new dimension. It became both an economic tool and a political instrument, enabling rulers to consolidate their power and finance their ambitions. The king's treasury, therefore, institutionalized what the battlefield has already decided: the florin as the currency of power. Last but not least, having explored the Angevin monarchy in the previous chapter, chapter 4 moves from royal to papal politics to analyze how the Holy See, above all under Pope Gregory X, became a major engine behind the florin's diffusion. What emerges here is that the papacy, through its vast fiscal machinery, and especially the collection of the so-called sexennial tithe of 1274-1280, accumulated and redistributed thousands of gold florins. Strikingly, this happened well before Florentine bankers rose to dominance at the Curia under Boniface VIII, so at the turn of the century. More or less 20 years later, the facts that I'm describing to you. The florin's prominence in papal finances, therefore, cannot be explained by any early Florentine monopoly, but rather by the papacy's own political needs and fiscal practices. Through the 1270s, remarkable proportions of the tithe income consisted of Florentine florins. Here on the slide, you can see all the many different coins that were actually being collected during the time. And as you can see, there are coins of any sort, like gold coin, silver coin, billion coins, coins from Florence, from Venice, from Genoa, from Siena, from many different cities, not just local Angevin, Napolitan coinage. In the 14 ecclesiastical provinces of southern Italy, forming the collectorate of Bishop Pietro, here we are, florins made up roughly 1/3 of the total revenues. When the surviving documentation is precise about the actual coins paid, only, and this is just for 35% of all entries, because the remaining 65% mention generic gold ounces without specifying exactly which coins were used to pay. But when we do have this better data, the picture becomes even clearer. Of that 35%, basically 31% of revenues were paid in gold florins, while all the other gold, silver, and bullion currencies combined accounted just for 4%. In practice, the florin dominated papal receipts. Well, just I have to go back. A couple of final remarks before opening, before listening to your questions. What I want to say is that crucially, this was not the result of an explicit papal preference, right? Gregory X imposed the sexennial tithe to finance a new crusade, which never happened anyway, ordering a levy on all ecclesiastical revenues across Christendom, from Norway to Sicily and from Portugal to Jerusalem, for 6 years. Yet he never ordered payment in florins. Collectors were simply instructed to accept whatever coins the local economy provided and the local circulation provided. So unlike Charles of Anjou, who explicitly ordered florins for soldiers' pay, the papacy did not need a specific currency, only liquidity. Its agents would take any coin in circulation and still florins poured in. Indeed, this was also possible because the florin, as I showed, was already firmly rooted in the monetary landscape of the Kingdom of Sicily. But even though the Crusades never materialized, the consequences were profound. After Gregory's death in 1276, the accumulated funds were redirected towards the Pope's political and military aims within Italy. By adopting the florin to finance their projects, whether the costly campaigns against the Ghibellines in Romagna in 1282, or the conflicts with the Aragonese in Sicily during the Vespers, the papacy granted the Florentine coin unparalleled visibility and reach. Through ecclesiastical networks, the florin circulated among dioceses, monasteries, bishops, and notaries across the peninsula. Through the merchants, bankers who received tithe money in deposit, it entered broader circuits of credit, investment, and exchange. Each movement, use, and reinvestment reinforced its presence, the florin's presence, further amplifying its diffusion. In this sense, the papacy's role mirrors and magnifies, we can say, what Chapter 3 revealed about the Angevin monarchy. Both institutions used the florin because it was stable, trusted, and universal. Both paid armies, financed political projects, and exercised power through the Florentine coin. And in doing so, both projected it far beyond trading networks. And this is where I stop. And thank you for your patience. And I'm happy to answer to any questions you may have. Thank you.
Yeah, if you have any questions, please feel free to just unmute yourself and ask. Or you can drop them in the chat if you would prefer that as well.
Well, if no one is speaking up, I've thank you very much for that, and it allowed me to move into the future, an area of my own interest, and that was the exchange of gold and silver. I mean, I do it during late antiquity, but obviously this is going on in a lot of places. And you spoke near the beginning of your discussion that there seemed to be the movement of gold from Africa to Europe, at the same time the movement of silver to Africa, which would imply that gold was more valuable in Europe and silver was more valuable in Africa. I was kind of wondering how that might be going on. And then you got to your later discussion about where you had an actual example of a trade in gold and silver. And I'm just wondering, first of all, how widespread that was. And in particular, was there any arbitraging going on? Were people taking advantage of the greater value of silver in the south, greater value of gold in the north? They really didn't care about the florin. They were just using this as a money-making operation.
Yeah, so thank you for your absolutely interesting questions. So yeah, I didn't want to provide too many details about this. It's also a complex, issue. The gold-silver exchange and the gold-silver ratio. These are all discussed in the book, of course. But because again, I just this time to give a general overview of my points. But I agree. So it's absolutely a complex problem. What I've tried to do in my book is to highlight what has been said, told, and written about this in the past, showing how very often historians have used really just labels or categories that belong to our times, right? So your question are perfect. I mean, to answer to your question, I mean, one is to look at the sources at the in the archives. For example, they did that to collect these gold-silver ratios, right? But again, how do we know that these ratios, these numbers that they calculated, they extrapolated from the sources, were not affected by arbitrage or were not affected by other elements? So my point is, there was definitely an exchange going on, but what I'm trying to argue in the book, or what I've argued, is that maybe we should try to think about these exchange more, from a medieval, with a medieval approach or mentality, or from a medieval perspective. So my point is, definitely merchants were looking for profit, and I'm quite sure about it. But then at the same time, I don't think they were really, calculating or something. They were also, because there was nothing like a one way or trading, by sea. I mean, it took a while, and I mean, they didn't just go to North Africa for gold and came back. It wasn't just an exchange like this. Whereas in the literature, sometimes you have this sense of like very modern, or like modern way to look at this problem. So my point, my question is, I definitely that there were other factors, and I think that a detailed study of these issues, starting from the sources. That's my concern. Starting from archival sources. I'm not sure how many of them there are anyway, but I mean, will allow us to rethink about all these dynamics. And so, yeah.
Yeah. No, you raised the objection to my own idea that I had thought of, is that you don't have point-to-point trade in gold and silver most of the time, right?
You mean if there are direct evidence for this exchange, like gold for silver? Yeah. I've never found them, honestly.
Yeah.
Like that specific, no. I mean, these are like dynamics and numbers that people build based on different, sources and references. And again, I'm not saying that the interpretation is not correct. I mean, it's valid. But what I've tried to do in this book, especially for the story of the Florin that I want to tell, is to contextualize the coin in its own time, right? Rather than, again, as many before me maybe did, like, just use a label or use like a theory, a model to explain something, but without really explaining what was going on.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah. Any other questions? I'm guessing no. So just thank you again, Stefano. Really appreciate you coming in and giving this talk, enlightening us all about the Florin.